Welcome to Reform Thinking. This is The Deep Dive, and today we are opening a story that often feels like an oasis of calm right after a severe storm. You asked us to analyze the Book of Ruth, one of the most structurally and theologically tight narratives in all of Scripture, and we're going to be using the rigorous framework of Bruce K. Waltke's Old Testament theology.
And that request gives us, I think, the perfect mission. We're not just summarizing a short story.
No, not at all.
Our goal is to really dissect the specific insights, the vital nuggets of knowledge that explain how divine providence and the human expression of covenant kindness, or theology, intersect, how they drive forward salvation history.
And we're framing the origins of David's royal ancestors during what was probably Israel's darkest hour.
The morally bankrupt era of the warlords. The time of the judges, yeah.
I think framing it within that chaos is it's essential. The Book of Judges ends with total societal breakdown, right? Every man did what was right in his own eyes.
Exactly.
And then immediately we get this narrative of order and fidelity and future hope.
It's like a theological palate cleanser. And we need to remember the historical context. The events in Ruth, they took place during that chaos of the warlords.
Right.
But the book itself, in its final written form, was clearly composed much, much later, maybe between the establishment of the monarchy, say 1000 BC, and the exile around 600 BC.
That distinction is so important, isn't it? The timing of the events versus the timing of the writing.
It's key. The composition date is pretty much signaled by that concluding genealogy, which links this whole seemingly private family story directly to King David.
So it's not just history.
No, it's an authoritative theological commentary. It's written to explain the legitimacy and the divine sponsorship of the Davidic monarchy. It offers hope that God is working quietly, even when the nation is at its absolute worst.
I find its placement in the canon really intriguing. In the Hebrew canon, it's often grouped with the 5 Megilloth read during Pentecost.
Yeah.
But the placement that interests me more is the one you sometimes find after Proverbs.
Ah, yes.
Why would a story about a Moabite widow follow the Book of Wisdom?
Well, that placement is quite deliberate and, I think, beautiful. The final chapter of Proverbs gives us that iconic ideal of the Oshet Isle, the noble, competent, virtuous woman. Placing Ruth immediately after that provides a specific, lived-out example. Ruth isn't some theoretical ideal. She is a Moabite widow in a field. Her virtue becomes tangible, practical. Her actions define covenant fidelity better than any, abstract list of traits ever could.
And of course, the placement we're most familiar with right after Judges gives us that burst of heavenly sunshine you mentioned. It's an immediate reassurance that, look, national failure doesn't mean God's plans have failed.
That's it. Even when the tribal armies are failing, the priests are corrupt, and political anarchy is the rule of the day, I Am is orchestrating events. He's working through the fidelity of individuals to secure the lineage necessary for salvation history.
The story shifts the focus. It moves from Israel's huge political and moral failure to the certainty of future hope, and that hope is rooted in David's line.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this setup and jump into the narrative. We begin in that desperate period when warlords ruled, which sets the stage for spiritual chaos.
Yeah.
And that leads us right to the initial descent in Ruth chapter 1.
The narrator is swift and very precise in establishing the stakes. The setting is Bethlehem of Judah, which, ironically, means house of bread.
Right.
But during this famine, I Am, through providence, is punishing his people, and the house of bread is empty.
And we meet Elimelech and Naomi, who decide to emigrate from Judah to Moab. Their names carry so much expectation.
They absolutely do. Elimelech means, my God is king, which reflects the hope of that covenant relationship. And Naomi means pleasantness. These names suggest they were once prosperous, maybe faithful.
But their actions, leaving the promised land to escape a famine, that already signals a kind of lack of faith in the king whose name Elimelech bears.
And the contrast with their sons' names is just stark. It's devastating.
Yeah.
It truly captures the declining glory of Israel in that time. The sons are Mahlon and Kilion, and while there's some debate on the precise meaning, the common interpretations are something like sterile and spent, or sickness and wasting. The tragedy of their spiritual and physical state is written right into their names. So this isn't just a family migrating. This is the household of my God is king becoming the house of sterile and spent.
That shift is such a visceral theological comment on the state of the covenant community during the Judges. Israel itself is becoming sterile, wasting away its inheritance.
And the tragedy just continues. It compounds. In Moab, Elimelech dies. Then after 10 years, both sons die childless, and they married Moabite women. a choice that was a questionable theological practice at best, according to the source material.
Right, Moab was the product of Lot's incest, and the law was pretty clear about Moabites being excluded from the congregation.
For 10 generations, yeah, because of their hostility toward Israel during the Exodus.
So Naomi is left utterly destitute, helpless. 3 widows in Moab, a pagan land devoted to the vile deity Chemosh. No male protector, no food, no way to preserve Elimelech's name or property back in Israel. They are in absolute need of a scythe.
Their predicament is the lowest point.
Yeah.
But the narrator never lets this deep personal tragedy be seen as just random misfortune. And this brings us to the powerful literary device that frames the whole story. The inclusio of providence.
Okay.
The story begins and ends with an explicit statement of I am's intervention.
The opening intervention is in Ruth 1.6. Naomi hears the good news that I am had come to the aid of his people by ending the famine. That signals hope. It calls her home. It's the gift of grain seed.
Right, and the conclusive intervention is in chapter 4, verse 13. The text says, so Boaz took Ruth, and I am enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. This is the gift of human seed.
By using this framing device, the author is making an authoritative theological statement to the listener, isn't he?
Precisely. A human might only see chance, or coincidence, or maybe just Ruth's hard work. But the narrator, speaking with authority for God, asserts that the entire arc of this story, from death in Moab to the birth of David's grandfather in Bethlehem, is guided by the good hand of providence.
It moves from sterility and death back to life and abundance.
All orchestrated by the sovereign I am.
And that's really the essential message from Waltke's analysis. I am is the unseen yet major actor directing the whole play. His purposes are moving forward even when all human institutions are collapsing.
He is sovereign, yes, but what compels him to act in this redemptive way? Well, that takes us to the theological engine of the book.
See, it's one of those Hebrew words that we can't just translate as kindness or mercy.
Yeah.
It's so much heavier than that.
It is. It's I am's sublime attribute of abundant ease, and it's best understood as help to the utterly helpless, rooted in a covenant relationship.
Okay.
So when we talk about easing, we're talking about loyalty, fidelity, and reliability shown to a covenant partner who can't reciprocate or help themselves.
So when I am shows CC the Israel, he's acting in line with his own character and the promises he made to Abraham. He sustains his plan of salvation through Abraham's seed, even when Israel deserves destruction.
That's the divine side. And this attribute then becomes the standard, the inspiration for how true Israel should live. It inspires them to serve I am by redeeming their covenant partners through acts of CC. Human thesis is a mirror of the divine.
I think we need to slow down on one nuance here, which I find particularly important. The source material distinguishes between 2 types of thesis operating here.
Yes, that's a subtle but critical theological point. I am CC to national Israel. His promise to preserve them, bring them out of famine, fulfill the Abrahamic covenant, that's unconditional. It guarantees restoration to the whole people, regardless of their immediate spiritual state.
But the SC is shown to the individual. The reward of a life preserved, a name maintained. That's conditional.
It's conditional in the sense that I am rewards those who themselves show sev. The reward for an individual's fidelity is directly tied to their willingness to practice self-sacrificial kindness toward the helpless. Those who embody I am's character are the ones I am actively blesses within the redemptive program.
And this theology of action isn't just in the plot. It's in the very structure of the book. The literary artistry of the chiastic structure is like the narrative skeleton.
Absolutely. The chiastic arrangement where the narrative turns at the center, harmonizes the plot, and reinforces the theme that God moves everything from chaos to covenant order. We can divide the story into 5 acts, but the chiastic pattern, A, B, X, B, A, shows the internal balance.
Let's trace those outer parallels, the A and A parallel, because they capture the beginning and end state of God's work so well.
Okay. So A is the famine in chapter 1, verse 1, and that balances A, the barley harvest at the end of chapter 1. But A is also Naomi, who is too old, empty, and sterile, and that balances A in chapter 4. A son was born to Naomi. The structure itself reinforces that transition from death and hunger to abundance and life, all framed by God's gifts of grain seed and human seed.
And if we follow that pattern inward, the structure points us straight to the center, X, as the turning point of the whole story.
And that center point is chapter 3, the plan laid by Naomi and Ruth, which culminates in Ruth lying at Boaz's feet on the threshing floor. Why is this the center? Because this is the riskiest yet most decisive moment.
Right.
It's where human initiative, a bold countercultural act of Hesed, intersects most dramatically with the unfolding of providence.
So the structure itself testifies that human action, when it's motivated by covenant loyalty, is the very mechanism through which I am brings his promises to fruition.
Yes. It moves from barrenness, A, to the plan of hope, X, to the resulting life. It's a beautifully crafted assurance.
Now, let's look at the players, because the narrator uses the characters themselves to illustrate the different degrees of covenant fidelity. We can start with the flawed covenant partner, Naomi.
Naomi is a study in spiritual distress. Her name, Pleasantness, becomes this cruel irony when she gets back to Bethlehem and renames herself Mara, which means bitterness. She explicitly says, I am has testified publicly against me. I am has afflicted me. She feels she has been left empty. Her faith has just been shattered by her double bereavement.
She is spiritually divided and at first without hope. We see this so acutely when she advises her daughters-in-law.
She pragmatically tells Orpah and Ruth they have no future with her. She says, go back to your mother's house, and in doing that, she's implicitly advising them to return to worshiping their pagan gods.
And that's the tragic irony. A true covenant partner, in her deepest despair, is directing two potential converts back toward vile Shemosh.
It's irrational behavior born of utter desperation. Yet, paradoxically, just moments before, she prays for I am say sad upon them.
This split just reveals her broken state. She feels empty, she sinned by leaving the land, and she can't reconcile her despair with God's promises. But deep down, she still has enough understanding of the covenant to pray for its blessing on others.
Which makes her one of the most relatable characters in Scripture.
Yeah. But despite her initial lapse, she remains a true covenant partner through her later actions.
Her fidelity is restored in three key ways. First, she physically returns to the Promised Land, even in her bitterness. She accepts God's intervention in the famine. Second, she continues to interpret her life under providence. She names her affliction, but later she praises God for the goal. And third, and this is critical, she becomes the architect of the redemption plan, based on Mosaic law.
And her community affirms her at the end. They embrace her, rejoice with her, her position is solidified, I&M rewards her ultimate faith.
And this return journey also provides that critical comparison between the two women who were grafted into the family. Orpah functions as the foil character.
Orpah is tested to the limit, isn't she? Naomi makes it absolutely clear their future depends on faith in an invisible God, not on visible immediate security.
And Orpah chooses the visible path. She acts on sight. She weeps. She kisses Naomi, but ultimately she goes back to Moab and her pagan family. Her initial asect to her husband and mother-in-law, it proves to be based on, familial affection, social pressure, not total dedication to I am.
The narrator doesn't judge her harshly for being human, but he does judge her choice.
Oh, yes. She disappears entirely from the stage of sacred history. She was unwilling to participate when the cost involved abandoning her old life. Her brief presence really only serves to magnify the radical decision of Ruth.
And then we come to Ruth, the true Gentile partner. Her response is one of the most quoted declarations of faith in all of Scripture.
Ruth, the Moabitess, by a radical act of faith and Isaac, she cleaves, the word is dabak to Naomi, and to the living God. Her classic confession in 1.16, your people will be my people, and your God my God. It's often compared to the call of Abraham.
She also leaves her homeland, her family, and her gods for the security found in I am alone.
It's an act of total dedication, and her fidelity is practical. When they get to Bethlehem, facing poverty and prejudice, Ruth takes the initiative to glean. Her faith is expressed through her seat toward Naomi, making sure they eat.
And the narrator tracks her escalating social acceptance through her changing titles. She starts at the very bottom.
She calls herself Nokria, a foreigner. Then, as she gains acceptance, she calls herself a Shippa, a menial slave, which implies she's not even eligible for marriage. Finally, under Naomi's guidance, she sees herself as an Ama, a marriageable female slave. This ascent mirrors her acceptance into the community.
It's a beautiful progression, but Boaz elevates her status even further when he first sees her.
When he notices her diligence, she's a Nera, a girl. He immediately addresses her as Biti, my daughter, which signals acceptance and family standing. But the pinnacle is reached when he identifies her as an Ushethiel.
The same term used for the ideal woman in Proverbs 31.
It's the highest accolade. It means a noble and competent woman. It signifies loyalty, courage, strength. It places her on the same moral and spiritual plane as Boaz himself, who is introduced as a gibor, a a man of standing.
He recognizes her moral integrity outweighs her ethnic origins.
And that recognition extends to the whole community. They ultimately declare that Ruth is better than 7 sons, which is the greatest possible compliment in that culture.
Her sighing is not passive, it's active and courageous. Boaz even calls her second act of kindness, the proposal, bolder than her first.
Exactly. She acts out of sacrificial love, risking everything to secure a future, not just for herself, but for her dead husband's lineage.
Which brings us perfectly to the mechanism of that security.
Yeah.
The kinsman-redeemer, the
Beautiful. The entire plot hinges on this legal and relational concept. The root word for redemption, geol, appears about 20 times in this short book.
Wow.
Which tells you exactly what the author wants us to focus on: family protection. The geol is, strictly speaking, the family protector.
And the responsibilities tied to this role were heavy under Mosaic law. We should probably detail those to understand the weight of Boaz's decision.
Okay, so the geol had 4 main duties. First, avenging the death of a murdered relative. Second, buying back family property sold due to poverty. Third, redeeming a relative sold into slavery. And fourth, the levirate responsibility, marrying the widow of a deceased brother to preserve his name and inheritance.
And Boaz is introduced as the man most capable of taking on this role.
He's described as a gibber hail, a capable, powerful man of wealth and standing. He has the means, the reputation, and the character to serve as the protector. His very first words in the book are a prayer of blessing, "I am be with you," which immediately confirms his faith.
His actions in the field are the first tangible sign of his extraordinary state.
His generosity goes so far beyond the legal requirements of gleaning. The law just required him to leave the corners of the field unharvested. But Boaz gives Ruth protection from the workers, he invites her to share a meal, and crucially, he commands his workers to deliberately pull out sheaves from the bundles and leave them on the ground for her to find.
That's a practical illustration of Duma. It's grace, not requirement. It's kindness that goes above the minimum required by law, and it mirrors Iam's action toward helpless Israel.
And this sets the stage for the dramatic and highly unconventional proposal scene orchestrated by Naomi.
Yeah, Naomi instructs Ruth to prepare for marriage, go to the threshing floor secretly, and lie at Boaz's feet after he's asleep. This seems incredibly risky.
It's countercultural, bordering on impropriety. Naomi, she's relying on both Ruth's reputation as an Oshet ale and Boaz's moral character. She takes a gamble born of desperation.
The instruction to lie at his feet, which can be a euphemism, introduces serious dramatic tension. How does the text mitigate the risk in this act?
By Ruth's specific wording when she makes the proposal, she elevates the entire encounter from a potential seduction to a solemn legal request. When Boaz wakes up, startled, Ruth identifies herself and makes the formal request. "Spread the corner of your garment over me." That word for corner, ne-n-p, is the exact same word used for wings in Boaz's earlier prayer, where he prayed that Ruth would find refuge under Iam's wings.
I see the rhetorical cleverness there. She uses his own prayer of blessing as the basis for her marriage proposal. She's asking him to become the physical agent of the divine protection he had just invoked.
It's brilliant. She's saying, "You asked Iam to protect me, now you be Iam's protector for me." And Boaz recognizes the depth of her fial. He immediately blesses her, recognizing that her second act of be'ah is bolder than her first.
But Boaz, though willing, has to operate strictly within the law. He acknowledges that there is an irrekujol, and he has to give that relative the first opportunity.
Which leads us to the crucial legal scene at the city gate and the introduction of the narrative foil to Boaz.
Boaz, as the model of covenant fidelity, immediately convenes a legal quorum of 10 elders. He waits for the nearest relative.
And the narrator gives us this gift of subtle theological humor and judgment here. That nearest relative is addressed as Paluni Alminni, which is basically Mr. So-and-so.
Right.
It's a derogatory, dismissive term. The narrator deliberately refuses to immortalize the name of a selfish man, ensuring that, like Orpah, he just vanishes from salvation history.
The legal dialogue unfolds in 2 masterful exchanges, designed specifically to expose this man's self-centered motives.
In the first exchange, Boaz presents the easy part of the deal. Naomi is selling her field, and the nearest kinsman has the first right to redeem it. Mr. So-and-so agrees immediately, no hesitation. Why? Because redeeming the land enhances his personal fortune. It's an investment.
But the second exchange is the trap that tests genuine covenant fidelity. Boaz reveals the full obligation. Redeeming the land is tied to a levirate marriage to Ruth the Moabites.
And this changes everything. If he marries Ruth, any son born to them will be the heir of the deceased Elimelech. This means the redeemed property will be used to maintain the dead man's name, not add to Mr. So-and-so's own property. He has to sacrifice his own interests.
And his response is an instantaneous retreat. He says he can't redeem it because he would jeopardize my own inheritance.
This is the moment of theological clarity. Mr. So-and-so is willing to participate in the covenant community only when there is no risk and no personal sacrifice. He values his own fame and fortune over the legal, moral, and divine command to protect two helpless widows.
And Boaz's contrasting action provides the entire book's theological climax regarding human sosh.
Boaz steps forward, willingly sacrificing his wealth and future inheritance to redeem the property and marry Ruth. He does this explicitly to maintain the name of the dead with his property so that his name will not disappear. The source material makes it clear this isn't primarily a story of romantic attachment. It's a story of unselfish and sacrificial love within a family that can survive in no other way.
He acts as the ultimate Gödel, going above and beyond, taking on the cost himself to bring life and order out of death and chaos.
And the story of redemption doesn't stand in isolation. It intentionally links back to earlier, darker precedents in Genesis, forming what Waltke calls the Ruth corpus.
This corpus links the story structurally to Lot and his daughters in Genesis 19 and Judah and Tamar in Genesis 38. These comparisons highlight the extraordinary moral ascent that paves the way for the Davidic line.
Let's first acknowledge the dark similarities. All three stories involve a separation from the elect community: Elimelech from Judah, Lot from Abraham, Judah from his brothers. All suffer tragic results: death, loss, barrenness. And all feature female barrenness and the subsequent need for a near kinsman to secure the lineage.
And critically, they all feature the woman taking dramatic, countercultural initiative, the so-called bed trick, during a time of celebration or loss of order.
Lot is made drunk. Judah is heading to sheep shearing festivities. Boaz is merry after the harvest. In all cases, the initiative secures a male child. Lot's offspring are Moab and Ammon. Judah's are Perez and Zerah. Boaz's is Obed. The similarities confirm a repeating pattern of God working to secure the seed. But the differences: they illuminate a powerful moral development.
That diachronic scale of escalating morality is where the theological insight really lies. How does the quality of the Redeemer's responsibility increase?
It's a stark progression, showing God gradually refining the expectations of his people. Lot is compelled by his daughter's trickery. Judah is compelled by Tamar's legal trap, even if he declares her right. But Boaz willingly, sacrificially, and publicly redeems the family, even though he was only the second choice. He's the active agent of Disse who forfeits his own wealth.
And the women's actions also escalate impropriety.
Lot's daughters act crudely, fueled by alcohol, just to secure propagation. Tamar uses guile, disguises herself as a harlot to compel Judah to act. Ruth, however, acts innocently and delicately. Her proposal is backed by Naomi and approved publicly by the elders. She acts with transparency within the bounds of the covenant community.
And most significantly, the issue of these unions escalates, moving us closer to the central salvific event.
The sons of Lot, Moab and Ammon, become hostile nations rejected by Israel. Perez, the son of Judah and Tamar, is acceptable and becomes Boaz's direct ancestor. But Obed, the son of Boaz and Ruth, is the grandfather of King David. The union moves from being politically rejected and morally questionable to being fully within the law and leading directly to the kingship.
This brings us to the climax, the restoration and lineage. The marriage and the birth of Obed are explicitly attributed to Im, completing that divine frame of providence we discussed.
And Obed's name means worker or server. The women of the community deliver this poignant benediction over Naomi, celebrating her restoration. They praise Im for providing a ghoul.
And the high point of their joy is that declaration: Naomi has a son. Her bitterness is reversed, her emptiness is made full. She receives the child, metaphorically, as her own.
The women specifically predict that this child will rejuvenate and sustain Naomi in her old age. And they attribute this blessing to the love of Ruth, noting that Ruth is better than 7 sons, a hyperbole indicating that her loyalty and Vlosat have accomplished what 7 male heirs could not.
And the book concludes with a genealogy, cementing the story's political and theological relevance.
Right. The 10-name genealogy, from Perez to David, mirrors the 10 nameless in Genesis 5 and 11. It signals a new, ordered chapter in salvation history. Boaz fills the favored 7th slot, and David fills the 10th slot of completion.
So Boaz sought only to give social immortality to Elimelech, but I am rewarded him with something far greater. inclusion in the lineage of King David, and by extension, the Messiah.
And this entire framework allows us to see the characters not just as historical people, but as types foreshadowing the larger history of redemption.
We see Boaz as a type of Christ, the greater kinsman-redeemer. Boaz sacrificed financially to pay the price of redemption, giving land and inheritance to a family he wasn't legally obligated to save.
And the antitype, Jesus Christ, sacrifices his own blood, his life, to give eternal life and a regenerated inheritance. Boaz brought his bride into rest and secured the dead man's name. Christ, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, resurrects the dead and gives the church final rest and eternal social immortality.
And Ruth herself typifies the status of redeemed Gentiles within the covenant. Her inclusion, a Moabitess in the royal line of David and later in Matthew 1, demonstrates the universal scope of the Savior's lineage.
God elevates these women, Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, from their non-Israelite or compromised statuses, not through ethnic purity, but solely through their fidelity and faith commitment to I am. Ruth becomes the people of God by faith alone.
And finally, the union of the two widows, Naomi and Ruth, typifies the inseparable union of ethnic Israel and the Gentiles in the formation of the church.
Naomi, representing ethnic Israel, mediates Ruth's entrance into the covenants. But the hopeful young widow injects vitality back into the failing old widow.
Ruth's self-sacrificial love transforms the bitter and hopeless Naomi back to the joy of salvation. They are co-heirs of the same covenant relationship, secured by the actions of the Gule.
It's a perfect picture of the sovereign I am working through desperate circumstances.
So what does this all mean when we bring all these insights together?
The Book of Ruth is a deeply constructed theological narrative showing the beautiful harmony between God's absolute sovereignty, his providence, and human faithfulness. Divine providence uses human us, that sacrificial covenant kindness, as the mechanism to secure the birthline of King David and ultimately Christ.
It assures us that even during times of anarchy, I am is active and sovereign, moving through the seemingly ordinary events and motivations of ordinary people. A Moabite widow, a desperate mother-in-law, a landowner, answering prayers and rewarding courageous human initiative rooted in covenant fidelity.
The key characters progress from barrenness and distress to fullness and fame precisely because they display these covenant virtues. And the consequence for those who display self-interested false Hesed like Orpah and Naomi is that they simply disappear. They sacrifice their chance at social immortality for immediate gain.
It teaches us that covenant life requires a self-sacrificial cost, believing that God will give life to the dead and preserve a name through costly action.
And this concept of costly Hesed demands contemporary application. The whole narrative structure holds Boaz and Ruth up as examples for us to imitate.
And that's where it gets really compelling for us today. The book leaves us with an open challenge drawn directly from Ruth's experience. What sacrifices and promises can we claim today as we humbly ask God to work through his loving kindness? And in what specific ways are we called to demonstrate Hesed in our generation, understanding both the cost and the rewards of that practice?
Consider the example of Boaz. He willingly sacrificed his own wealth and inheritance for two helpless outsiders and a deceased relative he never knew. We have to ask ourselves if we are willing to put aside our own immediate self-interest, our inheritance, to show radical, costly kindness to those who can't repay us.
It's a striking concept that our willingness to show Hesed to the helpless might be the very mechanism I am uses to continue his work in the world, moving the current situation from emptiness toward future life.
The Book of Ruth demonstrates that the future of salvation history is secured through the quiet practice of extraordinary fidelity.
A truly challenging and layered deep dive into the sovereignty of I am and the requirements of human covenant kindness. Thank you for walking us through the gift of Hesed and the lineage of David.